Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulihil kareem. So this is part two of the video in which we're talking about the two extremes in religion, right? And this is uh, again connected with the understanding and the tafsir of Surah Al-Fatiha, غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. So again, a disclaimer from my side. I don't claim to be a scholar of Islam, right? I'm just a student of my sheikh, and I keep on learning, right? I try to stick to classical understanding of the scholars. I respect the scholars, um, and not and try not to say if I say something that I try not to say anything that goes against the understanding of the scholars. And if you feel like I said something, then you can always correct me. I always welcome corrections. So the second part, right, is about the dali, right? So the dallin, right? Scholars say, and this is again from the tafsir. This part, what I'm going to say right now, is what I heard from the tafsir of my sheikh. Is the dallin are people, like the broad category of people whose aqidah was modified. So again, the first category is the Puritans. One of the categories is the Puritans who become too strict, and because of being strict, they impose the religion in a very strict manner in their next generation. And after one or two generations, people get frustrated, they leave religion, and that decays. And religion decays very fast in generations, right? These people, right, they get overly devoted, right? The dallin, so like the other category, right? The dallin are people get overly devoted, and they start modifying their aqidah. So I give this example, right? That think about a rod, like a metal rod. It's too rigid, right? Those are the Puritans, right? They're trying to make religion too rigid, and in that way they make it too strict, right? The modifiers, right? They are trying to they're trying to make the rod too flexible, right? Making it too flexible, like for example, made of like foam or something, right? That you can bend it any way you want, or some other flexible material, right? So the correct approach to religion lies somewhere in that rigidity and over flexibility, right? We have to find that subtle combination, right? And there are some ways we can stick to that subtle flexibility, if you want to call it, if you want to say that. So these people, right, the deviations related to this group usually arises from Sufism, right? I'm, just to be clear, I'm a Sufi. I'm all for Sufism, but obviously you need to understand where we stand, right? If you are a Sufism or you're a Puritan, you need to understand what type of possible deviations can arise from yourself if you're not careful with your religion, right? And so if you look at history, right, Christians fall in this category. The Hindus, you can say, fall in this category. But obviously there can be a mixture also, where you have puritanical and obviously the puritanical deviations and the modifiers deviations, right? So if you look at history, right, the deviation that came in Christianity was through Paul, right, through Saint Paul, through his visions, right? And so what happens is Sufis, right, there's something called the kashf, right? It's a vision that Sufis get, right? And um, there's no point in denying, because there are a lot of very well-known scholars who have written down their experiences. So just to be clear, Islam and Sufism were the same thing, right? You can look up a channel, Let's Talk Religion, if you don't agree with me. There are a lot of people who have written this. Prominent people in our history were Sufis, right? So if we say that Sufism is a deviation, then we are obviously wrong about it. I'll talk about more about why I consider Sufism, being, Sufism as a part of Islam. That's a separate video. But if you look at history, right, the deviations on Christianity came from Saint Paul. If you look at the Hindu society, right, the Hindu religion, it's full of meditation and yoga and things that are part of Sufism, right? And so and you look at both of these groups, the Hindus and the Christians, their aqidah is completely changed, right? Like the oneness of God has almost disappeared, right? Especially in Hindus, right? There's still some indication in Christianity, but they have Trinity, which is obviously a deviation, right? So this category comes from Sufism, but that does not mean Sufism is wrong, right? It just means that you have to stick to the pure form of Sufism, right? So in my view, the correct approach lies somewhere in between, right? And you have to acknowledge that Sufism is part of Islam, but at the same time, you have to have some sprinkling of puritanical. You need to have some puritanical approach, like sticking to the Sunnah. Anything that deviates from the Sunnah, and I'll talk about bid'ah. Right, bid'ah is one of the most misunderstood concept in our religion, and so I'll talk about that. But labeling everything bid'ah as if there's something new is just a trivial, nonsensical approach. But we'll talk about that. But that's part of like being careful, right? If you're a Sufi, then you have to be careful that you have to have some sort of purity, right? Making sure that your religion stays pure, but not too pure such that you become a Puritan, you become too strict. So you have to be somewhere in between these two approaches, in order to be on the correct, in order to have the correct approach, right? Wallahu a'lamu bis-sawab. Like this is, I'm not saying that my understanding is the ultimate understanding, but but uh, I've given this a lot of thought, right? And why are we in this position right now where Islam is labeled as an extreme religion? Why is Sufism considered a deviation? What is our history? What are the possible what are the dangerous things that have happened in our history that have hurt our religion and so on? And so if you look at, we're living in the post Ottoman Saudi world, right? Whatever you want to call it. I don't have anything against the Saudis, nothing against there are Muslim brothers, nothing against the Turks, right? But we need to have a logical understanding. This is all part of learning, right? So we need to have understanding of where we stand in history, and we are in the post post Ottoman empire world, right? Where the Ottomans were defeated and eventually the Khilafat was ended, right? And so the Ottomans were very much into Sufism, right? Sufism was a very important, and is still a very important part of the Turkish society, right? But then we have the Puritans, who are the Saudis, right? So who is right and who is wrong? I'm not gonna talk because it becomes too political. Well, I might talk about this later on in other videos, uh, but these were like the two groups, right? Who like for example the Saudis, right? Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, he labeled all the Turks as, he said, like all the Ottomans, right? They're kafirs, right? The takfir of the entire he did the takfir of the entire Ottoman Empire. And so, because they were the Puritans, and this is one of the indications of the Puritans that they do this, right? Whereas you see you see in some cases significant modification of religion with the Ottomans, right? With the Turks, right? Although again, as I say, like I'm not uh, labeling anyone with anything right now, uh, but you see sometimes they do things that is not part of the religion. But I don't. But again, the I'm not very like strict when comes to labeling, because this is the way of the Puritans, that they're like, they label people. I don't label people. Because I've been labeled myself when when I went into a shop to buy some grocery in a Muslim shop, and then I was like, there was an Arab brother who started shouting at me, and he said, when I told him I'm a Sufi, he was like, Sufi, you're a mushrik, right? And so this labeling, right, is very dangerous. So I don't label especially individuals, right? You can label groups, but not individuals. So so um so yeah, as I was saying, like you see sometimes significant modifications in some of the deviant Sufi groups in different places. But there are Sufi groups, people who are Sufis who strict who stick with the Sunnah, right? And so this is where I'll talk about bid'ah. What is bid'ah? In the next few videos, we'll talk about what is bid'ah, and I'll talk about why Sufism, I think, is an important part of our religion. And we'll continue talking about these things. This topic has not ended. I'll keep on coming back to it in other videos. But I think this is good for now. Jazakallah for watching. If you have any questions, let me know. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.